Thanks, Keith. All right, one of the three in the front row. So other than the riffraff in the front row, how many of you have heard of modern testing before, this with a capital M, the thing that I've been talking about? So a couple of you. So I won't ask you now, but I'm not sure if you're here to hear more about it, my experiences, or to yell at me and tell me what's wrong with it. But that's okay. As Keith mentioned, I've been doing this for a while. I think it's been more than 15 years, but I'll go with 15. I don't feel quite as old that way. But I have been talking about this thing called modern testing with my podcast partner, Brett Jensen, for a couple years now. And it's kind of grown. It's got a little bit of momentum, a little bit of ideas, but I think it's important, rather than just, sometimes you see talks or blog posts or books that just throw some brand new stuff at you and tell you to think differently, and there's no context to it. It's like, do it because it's right. How many, you don't put your hands up, because I don't want to embarrass anyone or make you feel bad, but sometimes teams will follow a new development process because everybody's doing it versus figuring out why it works and how people got there in the first place, right? Head nods? Good. I do like to, if you haven't noticed it already, inevitably, for your speakers in here, you get asked for slides, like, oh, can I get a copy of your slides? And the answer is yes, and you can do whatever you want with them. Creative Commons attribution, you can show these at your company, just say I got these from Alan, and that bit.ly link will get you to this exact slide deck that I'm presenting today. So you are covered. You can ask me other questions as well, but the slide one I have covered in advance. I do this, if any of you are attending my workshop on Wednesday, I'll give you one of those too. I believe in full transparency. So with that, I think we can get started. Oh, no, we can't. First off, I wanted to thank you guys for coming, because this is not only you have a choice, but you have a choice of like 6 other things, because this thing lasts for 2 sessions. But it's okay, because I got the schedule out, and it's all right, because you're missing, I won't read them all off to you, but in this hour you're missing, is the testing role relevant? And I'm going to cover that, so that's cool. And no, it's good. So I don't know what else they have planned, but then in the second half, if you're thinking of jetting out early, don't, because the good stuff may happen at the end. And also, quality assurance in an agile development team, I'm going to cover that too. So this is good. This is the value session. Okay, let's get going. This is not a future of testing talk. How many of you have given or attended a future of testing talk before? I have, and I feel really bad about it because I was so wrong. And the Yogi Berra quote is something like, predicting things is hard, especially about the future. That may be horribly paraphrased, but you get it. So this is not a talk about, this is where I think things are going. This is a talk about change, and changes that we see happening whether we like them or not. How many of you, and I'll get off my little kick of getting you to raise your hands up all the time in a minute, or 10. How many of you work on an agile team, or work on a team doing agile processes? Good, big chunk of you. How many of you are on a separate test functional group? But not all of you? Okay, good. All right, we'll figure out how that works and plays along. Yeah, you're special, it's all right. So, a lot of real world experiences here. I'm going to share what I've learned. This is sort of like, anybody else really into comics when they were a kid? Man, I was a Marvel fanatic, which is really cool because now like the Marvel universe is exploding, which is really exciting. But one of my favorite things when I read comics was when they do the origin story. I don't know why. I thought it was really cool to figure out how whoever got their superpowers. So this is nothing to do with superpowers, but this is the origin story of modern testing. I'll talk a lot about where it is now, what we're doing, but I want to give you some ideas of where it came from, what experiences in my career led me to think about some of these concepts. Then I'll talk about kind of what the concepts are, and also how I've been applying them at my new role. So let's rewind about 7 years. So first off, I'm glad to see there are a few people my age in here, but again, no show of hands to embarrass yourself, but how many of you don't even know what this is? I realized I had, you know those shower thoughts where you think something, you go, what the? You know, not only this, but what does the word rewind mean anymore? What's the last thing you rewound? Did you rewind a DVD? Who said that? DVR. Oh, I guess you can fast forward and rewind in the show. Okay, so it still applies, but I'm going to stick with this graphic for now, but I realize that I may be alienating some people. Like, what is that? I've heard of that. My grandparents had that. So I'm going to go back about 7 years. I worked at Microsoft for 22 years. And you're thinking, how can that young guy up there have been there so long? Worked there for about 22 years, did a bunch of things. I started off working on Windows 95 testing networking and did a whole bunch of other stuff. So I'm not going to go all the way back because that would be irrelevant and, more importantly, boring. But we're going to go back about 7 years, and I worked on Xbox One. I heard, oh, woo, that's pretty cool, yeah. This Xbox One, working on that project, I was there from the very beginning when the Xbox One was this huge, like 60-pound PC with, it was sort of prototyping, because the Xbox One actually is just a PC in a nice small form factor. But the 2 years I spent on Xbox One, the best 5 years of my career. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of fun. Did a lot of cool things, but I learned some things. Definitely a big traditional product cycle, 2-year product cycle. But of course, testers were involved from the beginning. Waterfall-ish sort of models, testers get involved more towards the end. But I was there on day one, probably from about 30 people on the team, spinning off of Xbox 360. I came over from the Link team. Link became, shoot, if I get the lineage right. Link became, no, Communicator became Link, and then Link became Skype for Business. Right? I think so. Anyway, very much traditional org structure. I worked a lot on testing tools and infrastructure. I'm sure a lot, yeah, I did that. People do that stuff. When the product started, we were sort of in this sort of incubation mode for a while, and then there was a point when we took everybody from the 360 team and shoved them into the Xbox One team. So we had to do some reorganization to make sure things worked out right. My manager, who was the director of test for Xbox One, because they had a big functional org, came to me and said, hey, would you like to run the tools team for our infrastructure? And I said, well, I'll leave off. I said, no something way. And he said, well, why? Why? I said, well, is it you don't want to be a manager? I said, no, I like going back and forth, and I like managing, but I don't want to run a structural tools team. And part of it was, there are two big reasons. One was just the culture of Microsoft was that tools teams generally in our massively political hierarchical review system were TM. You Microsoft employee? Okay. Because usually only Microsoft people can laugh like that because it's true. But generally those tools teams got put at the bottom. Like, oh, you're not shipping product, you're not testing product, you're just doing stuff, how do I measure the value of that, blah, blah, fine, it's cool. But being very interested in leadership, which I think is an important skill for all of us, whether you're managing or not, but being interested in leadership and also things like reading books like The Cathedral and the Bazaar and looking how open source worked, I had an idea, and I ran the tools team for Xbox One. Again, I didn't manage a team. I worked all by myself, but not really. I managed a virtual team. There was me and one other person, a peer of mine who technically worked on it most of the time, him definitely full-time, but everything else we open sourced throughout the team. We ran 2-week sprints where different people from around the test org and the dev org towards the end would join our virtual team and build something and either continue to build it or if it was done, share that with the team. I handled communication Ended up sending a small newsletter. One thing I've done really well in my career is I can send the newsletter. I do one weekly for my team at Unity, but I would send newsletters to the team's Xbox One team, starting off first with our test team and then expanding and eventually being the whole community testing Xbox One, about 3,000 people. And we created and built a lot of infrastructure that's still being used today for Xbox One. One of the things I'm most proud about is we went from a PC, which we just use a network boot to automate, putting a new Xbox build on and running tests. But when we switched to using the actual console device, we stopped using a PC, of course, stopped having a regular BIOS, because that would be very hackable. And we needed a way to get new Xbox images onto this lab of 300 consoles 50 times a day. At the same time we were pondering how to do that, we were figuring out how we were going to flash new OSs on the Xbox One when people use them in the world. So we leveraged the same system. So you can think that pretty straightforward. How many have an Xbox One, seen one? When you turn it on, it wants an update, you go, crap. And then you let it download. But that's the exact same mechanism we use to automatically distribute all of our tests across this big lab of Xboxes. Blah, blah, blah. We found a bunch of bugs in that system doing that, but also enabled us to do a bunch of testing. Now I ask you this question. For those of you that have or have friends, this is a scary question to ask, who have an Xbox One, how many times has the update process bricked your machine? Oh, good, no hands. Whew! Because generally that's what I see. I'm really proud of that because that testing solution solved a problem that was a huge problem you may remember back in Xbox 360. So cool tools, community. This idea of community. At the same time, I ended up running some cross-company communities at Microsoft that Keith was also a part of. And in fact, the place we first met was this thing called the Test Architect Group, which was this gathering of senior testers across Microsoft. And we didn't necessarily solve a lot of big problems together, but we did talk about the challenges we were facing with each other, and we're able to learn from that. There is, very quickly, is a theory of knowledge acquisition from Philip Armour, where he says that you know something, you know you don't know something, you know you don't know something, can't give you an example, and then you don't have a suitable means for discovering what you don't know. And that's what community gives you. That's what the Test Architect Group gave us at Microsoft. That's what this community at Xbox One gave us. We were able to discover what we didn't know by sharing what was going on and bringing in different people to work on these things. It accelerated learning. And the trick is, in the community, if you have a good community, it will accelerate and encourage learning. So, long time on that slide, but it's all right. We have time. Community. The big takeaway from Xbox One is, wow, community is really important. And I didn't realize that at the time, to be fair. It's when I looked back and I said, oh, wow. And we've all had those experiences in our lives, right? We don't recognize at the time what it is we're learning, but we look back and go, oh, crap. I learned a lot back then. Xbox One shipped. Woohoo! I took a big, long vacation. And I came back, and my manager went and worked on this thing called Project Astoria, which I call the stupid science project. This was a thing, you might have heard about it. It was the thing to make Android apps run on Windows Phone. So my manager went to work on that. He goes, hey, come work on this. It'll be fun. I went to work on it. It was interesting. So the idea was great. We'll create Linux as a driver, Windows system driver. We'll put the Dalvik VM on top, and then we can just run Android apps right on top of that. If you're shaking your head, no, actually it worked. It's stupid simple. It worked. We could run Android apps. We could just take any APK, chuck it onto a Windows phone, and it would work for the most part. We would do, and what the hell, I'll tell you. We would do things like, as APKs, you may or may not know, are pretty easy to rip apart. We could take an app like Airbnb, for example, and make all the Google API, Maps API calls go to Bing Maps instead and have it work perfectly. just in an automated process. Something like that, for example, could happen. So it was fun. It was a science project. We could make stuff work. There was a marketing issue with this one is legally we can't just tell people to go download the APK and then copy it to your phone because that's not cool for Google. And then so their idea was that, oh, but it's okay. Windows Phone is so cool was their idea. Don't laugh yet. It's hard not to, right? They thought Windows Phone was so cool that the developers who made these Android apps will all take their APKs and submit them to the Windows App Store, and there will be a million billion apps for Windows Phone. And of course, none of the developers of Android apps thought that was a good idea. So it kind of died. The good thing is if you're using Windows, I gave up on Windows, but if you're using Windows and you use the new Linux shell on Windows, that's what's left. That's the driver. So it's Linux running. It works really well. It's cool. But back on topic, this team didn't have any testers. This is right when Microsoft decided that, you know what? I think testers aren't needed. Not needed, but testing role isn't needed. We're going to have a dev team, and this is Windows, so it's always a little bit. There's a word, but none of the words I'm thinking of are appropriate. So Windows didn't have. I didn't work on the test team, and this thing was part of Windows, but sort of off in its corner. I was on the quality team. Maybe it was quality and data. I can't remember. But it was a very small team. Maybe 6 of us and 40 devs working on this thing. Maybe something like that. Maybe 100 devs, now that I think back on it. Anyway, our role was to make sure all the testing was done, not necessarily do it, and we did a lot of work with data. What I did when I came back from my nice long vacation to France is I came into work and I talked to people a lot, but what I did for most of my day job was code reviews. And I didn't review the code as much as adding questions like, why aren't there any tests for this check-in? And later, when they'd start adding tests, and then eventually developers would ask each other, like, hey, Alan's going to ask about tests. You should have some tests. And then eventually getting to the point where they'd say, they'd just skip me and say, this needs tests. And then I would help them write better tests. What I found is it doesn't matter how experienced the developer is, the first time they go and try and start writing tests, they're pretty crummy at it. If you're lucky, they write a happy path test with a lot of assumptions, but eventually they get better. And this is the important part, is there's some talk amongst people that there's a development mindset and a testing mindset, and nobody can possess the two of them. And I think that's kind of BS. I think you can be a good developer and be a very good tester. Some of the best testers I've known have been architects on teams I've worked with. You come to them with a question, and they go, yeah, that won't work because blah, blah, blah. You should go try that out. Or let me try that out, blah, 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 and they find the bug. You can do both. What I learned on that team is developers can become, not only can they learn to test, they can become very good testers. So that idea began to develop. This is my first big dive personally into data. And in using data to understand how a product is being used in the field versus writing a bunch of tests for it. So one of the things we did very early on was we added instrumentation to the code to understand what was going on. I think a lot of you probably are doing this. And remember, this wasn't a service. People are very familiar with using data and monitoring in services, websites, web services, REST APIs, etc. We were doing this for a product that was being flashed on your phone. But still, data could get uploaded when you're on Wi-Fi. We could figure out what's going on. We hired an offshore team to basically take a list of about 20 apps a night, random apps from the top 10,000 of Android apps, and just try them out. We gave them a very specific script to make sure this works, not anything wrong, blah, blah, blah. And they would do it every night, and they'd take some time at the end of the day, enter this big, long bug report and report, Sound familiar? You guys do offshoring? Something like that. We did this for about 2 weeks. And during those 2 weeks, we would look at our data, make sure, okay, it makes sense. But after about 2 or maybe 3 weeks, we realized that we didn't need them to write bug reports because we knew everything that had gone wrong from our data. We can't always get so lucky, but it was pretty amazing. There's a team, one of the offshoots of Xbox, I won't go into the deep dive on what they built, but it was a streaming app, streaming games. And we would let you stream a game from the internet, and then at the end, during our beta, we'd ask you what your experience was, 1 to 5 stars. Everybody's seen these things, right? And if it was less than 5 stars, we would ask for like a couple free text, what didn't you like? And they say, laggy, pixelated, whatever. And we would compare their feedback with the data we had and start to build models. And eventually, it was really cool. We could predict with a very high level of accuracy what star rating someone would give their experience based on the data we had. So these are like big check marks in my head going, wow, data is really important. And understanding data and knowing how to use it is a big part of quality. I'm going to file that away in my workbook for when someday I work on this thing called modern testing. Another few big learning examples for me. I don't like being bored. I got bored on this team because the devs were all writing good tests. We had data to tell us the bugs. I worked on some infrastructure things. Well, one quick bit of career advice on that team is I've been really good at seeking work out, and even if I have to lie to do it. So they were going to implement some static analysis tools using SonarQube, and that sounded really interesting to me. And this was great because I worked on Linux and Java skills in that job. And they were talking about the work. I said, oh, I've done that stuff before. I can take care of that. I had never done it before. But I know how to look up things on the internet. So I got it all set up. I even got LDAP to work with it, which is a big pain in the butt for those of you who've done networking. But anyway, my career advice is don't be afraid to lie a little bit if it helps you get to try new things. That's free. That's not even part of the topic here. Free advice, no charge. So I got bored and went and worked on this project called Microsoft Teams. Probably some of you use it, have heard of it? No? It's like Slack, but for Office 365 users. We'll leave it at that. When I started, very small team. It was pretty cool. The dev manager there, the dev director, he had a team, again, without testers, because at that time, Microsoft did not have anyone in a specific testing role. But he was worried about quality. He hired me to be the quality guy. So my job, initially, was not managing anyone, which was fine with me. I'm happy bouncing back and forth between management and non-management roles. But my job was to make sure the team was doing the right quality things, get them to think about the breadth of quality, the breadth of testing, depth of testing, et cetera. So I did a lot of coaching. Did a lot of walking around. Before I did it through code reviews, which is sort of the introvert's way to, where my preferences are, the introvert's way to help with testing. But of course, as you all know, quality is a lot more than just testing. There's a lot more that goes into it. So I'd start talking to these folks about quality, things like, well, what are we doing for security? Let's talk about threat models. Let's talk about what are we doing to measure performance or reliability? What sort of stress testing should we do? Questions we all are probably very good at asking, right? And what I realized is, how many of you are managers that have like test leads reporting to them or have ever done that? A couple of you? Or you've been, at least you've observed it. I realized after a few months, and this wasn't a reflection, this was in real time, that I was treating these dev managers on the team as if they were my test leads. So if I was a manager managing a team of test leads, I would talk to them about the same thing I'd talk to these dev managers about, or vice versa. So I'd have regular one-on-ones with them, sometimes just hallway chats, but usually scheduled. And we'd talk about what was going on with quality, what they were doing with monitoring, what they were doing with, how they were approaching development itself. It's like, are you doing, how can we, like, what's the risk? And getting them to think about those things. So it solidified my idea that developers can become good testers, and that development managers can actually encourage and nurture testing and quality on their teams if they just need a little bit of help. Sometimes they just haven't had to think about it. Microsoft, when I first joined, people were working there for about 4 or 5 years and then leaving, because they started a little earlier than me and got a little more stock and got a little more rich, a lot more rich. But as the growth sort of slowed, people started staying around for 10, 22 years. And some of those people got stagnant in that time. And this move was fun, and being in this coaching role was fun because I could work with them directly and help them. And actually, like I said before, more and more learn that developers can actually learn a lot about testing, which is weird because we think that testing is our baby and it's our specialty and we know how to do it. But actually, a lot of times, especially as things move faster and faster, there's a lot more value in us helping others learn how to test. So I started thinking more about testing without testers. I gave a few talks on it. I was still learning, still forming ideas. I'm starting to realize this is something that may be able to work. And I believe, Whitaker gave the famous, and James is a good friend of mine, famous test is dead talk like 10 years ago now. It's been a long time. And it's like test is dead, long live test. Testing is changing. But testing as an activity is never, ever going to go away. But I was starting to learn that in some cases, when it makes sense and when there's the right support, either from people like you and I that can help make sure those things, the quality things happen, there's room for teams to be successful without having dedicated testing specialists. Don't freak out. We'll talk more about it later. You can throw stuff. So that's my big takeaway from teams. I stuck around teams till they shipped their first beta. It was awesome. One of the things I did there is this dev director who had hired me, good news, he hired me to be the quality guy. But then, and there's pros and cons to this, he ended up, for a while, blaming me for quality issues, and I have to take some accountability for it, right? Because these are my test leads making mistakes. But to combat that, I ended up owning and managing, the teams owning, as I put it, everything from check-in to deployment, which gave me a lot more ability to put my finger on quality issues from beginning to end. So CI gates, continuous integration gates, check-in gates, testing tools, testing infrastructure, what tests are being written, code coverage requirements. This is the first team, one of our services team, and eventually all of our back-end services teams implemented a really cool CI gate around code coverage, where this is really cool. They did it on their own without me telling them to. They didn't ask me to do it. They just said, oh, hey, Alan, we added a new gate that if code coverage percentage goes down on a check-in, then the check-in's rejected, to ensure that all new code had tests. And now I have a whole bunch of teams at Unity doing the same thing. It's really cool. So it was fun being able to be a part of all of that for 2 reasons. One is, of course, it gave me a lot better view of quality from end to end. I had a better idea what was going out. If I owned deployment and release management even, then yeah, I can be responsible and hold me a lot more accountable for quality. The other thing I learned is how important it is to accelerate the team and look at our end-to-end deployment time, or from how long does it take from a check-in to go from a check-in all the way to deployment or to even a testing environment, to looking at those bottlenecks and start to optimize those bottlenecks. That'll come up again in a bit. So the summary, for those of you that just had a quick nap or couldn't follow my tangents, is one is that eliminating or abandoning test teams with no plan is a bad idea. That's like duh, right? Is that you're laughing at me or him? Did I say something funny? Because I want to remember for next time I give this talk. But we've seen, and I've seen teams do this like, great, I saw Microsoft don't have any testers, so we're not going to have any testers. And then they wonder why quality goes to shit. When Bing, even at Microsoft, the first team ever to make this change, They just, one day, they're about at a 1-to-1 ratio. They made all of their testers devs. This wasn't all of Bing, but at least the team where I had mentors, mentees. There were managers who were surprised that their throughput didn't double because they had twice as many developers. Yahoo famously let go of all their testers. There's an article. I used to do a screenshot of it, but I got tired of people laughing at it because I want the focus to be on me, not on someone else's dumb mistakes. But it said, without the testers, there's no safety net. Well, while true, you need something. You need to lower the rope, maybe, so it's not so dangerous. There are other things you can do to just take away the safety net. Now they'll be very careful. Not if they don't know how to be careful. As I mentioned before, developers can be very good testers and automators. Oh, something I just did on a team recently is one of my web teams. So I work on services at Unity, which I learned after I started was anything in Unity that connects to the internet. So that's the website, a couple of our websites, all of our websites, internal tools, and then some stuff that's built into the editor, our analytics product, our ads platform, probably some other stuff. But one of our web teams was giving one of the QA people on my team, and we have very small ratios on purpose, and I'll dive a little bit more into the current thing in a minute, is there's a lot of like, okay, I got a big deployment. I want you to run through all these quick things to make sure it works on our developer dashboard. It's like, I don't like that. So I tell you what, let's come up with a happy path of things that need to be tested on the website for every release. Great. OK, now developers should run that before they check in. Whoa, what? So yeah, it takes 15 minutes, no big deal. I said, but you just told me that. I'm telling you that back. And they said, great. And they did it. They ran through it a few times, said, screw this, I'm going to automate this. So one way to get stuff automated quickly is give it to your devs as a manual task. They'll get bored, they'll automate it. Works every time. Again, free advice, not in the slide, but you can do that one. Coaching, really important. I've learned that, and that I'll talk more about that later. And then way back when, a long time ago, I was talking about Xbox One, talking about community. Community's still really important. I'll talk a lot about all these. So this is my origin story. This is all the stuff that led to this thing that I haven't talked about yet called modern testing. So currently, as I mentioned, I'm this director of services, self-proclaimed community leader, because I look at it much that way. I'll tell you why a little bit later, why I'm much more of a community leader than a manager. And I've had a chance to apply these things called modern testing. Now, I didn't join Unity and go, I've been thinking about modern testing. Let's do my thing. I didn't do that at all. I joined the company, and there was a whole bunch of information, and I went home every day for like 2 weeks with my head hurting because there was so much to learn. And I just did what I've always done, which is look around, figure out what needs to get done, and do that. Some of it's people management, some of it's figuring out what's going on, some of it's figuring out responsibilities, a lot of understanding, finding the right people to talk to. One of the things I do in my onboarding plans now when I hire someone new is I give them a list of about 10 people they should go talk to in their first month. Not necessarily people they work with, but building that network and connections is really important. So again, it goes back to community leader, right? I'm just like this big matchmaker. So over time, I realized as I was making these changes that these are helping me form this thing called modern testing, which most of you still don't even know what it is yet, but don't worry, we have time. I'm going to get there. So one of the things it made me ponder is this evolution of the test role, which sounds a lot like a future of testing talk, but bear with me. And I'll say in advance, quoting George Box, all models are wrong, some are useful. But you've seen this this model from Crossing the Chasm, the diffusion of innovation curve. Probably familiar to most of you. The idea that you have, my laser works here, for any new technology, you have laggards, you have the super early adopters or innovators, and then you have most people living in here. Like, this is a tough because it's a tech crowd, so I can't pick like too much of a technology thing. But think about your network of people you know, parents, friends. Some people already have the new iPhone, maybe, or some new Android device rooted with the cool stuff on it. A bunch of people are here with a pretty recent phone. Bunch of people in here are really happy with their 2-year-old phone. That's cool. A couple of you have friends using BlackBerries. Again, when you laugh, I assume it's true, but this is, again, it's 30-year-old model, but called Diffusion of Innovation Curve, but became really popular in this book called Crossing the Chasm, because the tough part is to get people to make this hop. So I don't know, where do ideas come from? My favorite author, Stephen Johnson, says ideas come from other ideas. And the way you get great ideas is two ways. One, you get a bunch of ideas to come together, or three, you come up with a whole bunch of ideas, throw the bad ones away. That's from Linus Pauling. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about testing, and not as well written, but here, what? I'm an artist. So we may have this thing like, I don't even know if modern testing is in the innovation part, but it's out here on the edge. A lot of teams doing agile testing, familiar with the Crispin books, Crispin and Gregory books on agile testing. This idea of you're the test specialist on the agile team. You're doing probably most of the testing for that team, but it's very integrated. You're doing iteration and adaptation. Probably a lot of you living in this world, maybe in here somewhere. It's at the conference, if I look at the whole testing world, this is probably right. Generally, people that come to conferences live a little bit more on this side. It's just the way things work. You're a biased audience. And then we also know that somewhere in some IT shop in, I don't want to pick on a state because you might be from there, but somewhere there's probably people getting paid $8 an hour to push buttons, just like I can remember. Actually, we're even working on Windows 95. We had hundreds, maybe more, thousands. I'll go with hundreds of testers who are just there, just play with it and find out what breaks. We're well beyond that today, which is good. But there's still some people living out there. So I think the model kind of works to talk about where we're going and how I see modern testing as an evolution or an adaptation of agile testing. Something you're probably all a lot more familiar with. Damn it, please talk about modern testing. So what is modern testing? Nice plug for our podcast, A/B Testing, where we talk about it a lot. One way I put it, and the way I'm putting it today, is that it's an antidote for, air quote, traditional testing methods. Traditional being testing happens at the very end of the product cycle. We test quality into the product, separate functional test teams, things like that. What does that mean? So in traditional, I just said that. So the waterfall model, or even a spiral model, if you're those of you that have studied models in software development, they're made to be predictable. We will be done by this date, and yes, generally predictive models have slippage. But in general, you're trying to do something in a waterfall or spiral or a longer cycle so you can be predictive. We're going to do a beta here, another beta here, we're going to ship here. And we'll do, when I worked on Link, I don't know how many Microsoft employees are here. Used to be a lot more. I can tell by the looks, maybe one. We used to have very long product cycles with these itty bitty things called coding milestones. So people would literally 8 weeks of coding, 3 months of stabilization. Who doesn't look at that? Well, maybe at the time you're in it, you go, this is the way we do it. But looking back, who can't look at that and go, what were we thinking? And developers will work on their features for those 8 weeks. There'd be a couple, 8 weeks of coding, a few months stabilization, beta, 8 weeks of coding, a few months stabilization, beta, a few months more of coding, take care of bug fixes, 3 to 6 months of stabilization, ship. Inefficiency just bugs the crap out of me. So looking back, I don't know how I even tolerated that, but I did. people would do things like developers I knew would check in code like, I need to return the vector height of this font, and it's Friday, and there's free beer in the cafeteria. Float, return vector graphic, blah, blah, return 12.0, enter. Done. My feature is done. It's buggy, but I can fix it during stabilization time. It's cool. Agile testing, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. Test specialists on the feature team. Works primarily, and agile testing, to be fair, as explained by Crispin and Gregory, is a whole team approach to quality. But in practice, in my observation, that's not always what happens. So I won't make you put your hands up in the air, but let me just describe it this way. If you are the tester on an agile team, what percentage of the testing do you think you do? Is it all, most, half? Usually what I find is on the agile teams where I talk to people on them, the tester, the test specialist, the QA, whatever you want to call them on that team, does most of the testing. Sometimes all, but most of the testing. Very little coaching. And in fact, when Lisa talks about modern testing, she talks about the coaching aspect primarily as the big difference. I think there's a little bit more to it, talk about in a second, but agile testing, very common. It's much, much better. Certainly much better than those predictive models. I like it. But then in modern testing, still the test specialist on the feature team, but very much concerned with, as I mentioned, coaching and then data. Remember my big insight about data? I think data is a great place for us quality-minded folks to spend some time. So I want to, some of you remember this stuff, right? I want to revisit traditional testing first, and then we'll spend, I promise, the whole rest of the time on modern testing. But I need to set it up. I got the origin story here, the big flashback, before I can get you to my future, my present. So, actually, no, I did use this version of Windows. I used to use, I'll age myself. I used to have a copy of Excel that had a runtime version of Windows, because it was a Windows app. Some of you may remember, like some of the Office apps had a runtime version of Windows. So they'd launch Windows long enough to run the app, then Windows would exit. So, but yeah. Let me tell you what I don't like about what I call traditional testing. I remember being on test teams where we thought our job was to hold up the release if we didn't think quality was good enough, which is good and bad. I didn't like, in hindsight, I don't like the delays. I like to optimize getting things to customers. And that's weird. There was a lot of, and this is my experience, so it might not reflect exactly to you, but a lot of emphasis on code correctness, meaning we were a lot of unit tests that I wrote, not the dev team, because they didn't write any tests. We focused a lot on sometimes code coverage, functional correctness. We didn't really think about the user experience enough. This is my experience at Microsoft, but there was so much effort on specs and testing to the spec and not learning and adapting from the customer. I mentioned earlier the safety net culture. And if you've been testing for a while, especially in more, I'll keep the air quotes going, traditional methods, a lot of times people will check in things that are crap because they know the tester will find their bug. And I've played my game of inefficient bug ping pong before, and I have my racket right here. Imagine the part right here. The developer goes, "You guys play table tennis ping pong?" I'm done with my feature. I found a bug. I fixed it. Nope. How about now? I hate my life. So that bug ping pong inefficiency versus me going up and saying, this is broken, right? Oh yeah, I'll fix that. Sit down with him. Okay, it's fixed. How come it can't work like that? What's wrong with that? And then there's almost a a codependent relationship that I view in the past of, and some testers, you guys, because you don't fall in here, so it's cool, I can tell the story, is developer goes, here's my code, please find my bugs. And the tester says, I found your bugs, now I feel validated. I have a job, my job is to find your bugs. Thank you for finding my bugs, this is great, I'm so glad you're here. Which is not awfully wrong, but it's a little wrong. It's a little wrong. Okay, it's a lot. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And my first job at Microsoft, we had a guy that knew NetWare, but he wouldn't tell. I knew a little bit, he knew a lot. He wouldn't tell anybody anything he knew because he thought that was his specialty and he shouldn't have to share it because it's what made him valuable to the team. He did get fired. The right thing did happen. But I think that this idea that testing is this special thing that only we can do, and we can be better at it, it's okay, we can be the best, we can be the expert, but the idea that only we know how to do it is wrong. I'm feeling more and more of that. And then, again, these siloed orgs over community. I want to build, what I've found is building software together versus here's the dev team doing their thing, run by a dev manager, and this wall of code comes over to the test team, and we do our thing, and we have conflicts, and we have different goals and different alignments, is weird. Yes, there are checks and balances. Those help. Those can happen within the team. OK. Finally, what time is it? Oh, we got time. Introducing the modern tester. This is Monty. I drew him too. I gave him a name. And what he works on is, probably imagine, speeding up the team. Part of the feature team. He's a coach. He does some testing. Looks at data a lot, and always probably very close to what a lot of you do already. Maybe you're not super deep into the data yet, but you know you need to be. Maybe you're not doing any coaching, but probably thinking it's probably not a bad idea. Not that far of a stretch. So and this is since I've talked about this before, I got to a point, I don't know if it was because I get ideas come from other ideas. I was reading Ray Dalio's Principles, which is a good book on principles in general and why they're important. And then I thought these other software ideas have principles. I wonder if modern testing needs principles. So I thought about it, and I wrote the modern testing principles. And the good news is, no, the bad news is they sucked. They were wrong. The good news is that I believe no matter what I do, whether it's software or principles or even a talk like this, that I will ship a crummy one first and then get feedback. Because I know if it's wrong, people will give me feedback. We have there's an inside joke among the listeners of our podcast, because Brent and I are still sure we only have 3 listeners. So when we meet someone, they say, hey, I'm one of the 3. Like Michael's one of our 3 listeners, which is great. But about 150 or so of the 3 are in the Slack team, which you can join. I'll give you info later, where we talk about modern testing. And they gave us tons of feedback. It was great to ship to that community, get their feedback, vet and reiterate, and And then we came up with a list that we kind of like, and I thought it would keep on changing, inevitably keep on changing. It hasn't changed now in 8 months. So I think I'm not saying they're perfect, I'm saying they're getting there. And these are the things that actually drive me at work, the things that help me focus on what I'm doing, and the things that help me coach teams that I want to go in this direction. And what happens when I go through these, inevitably, is some of you will nod your head and go, yep, already doing this. Cool to have a name to it. I hear that all the time. Some of you, the rest of you, many of the rest of you will go, huh, I could see how things would go that way, but it's scary and I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm in the middle. And some of you are just gonna hate me. But that's cool. That's cool. I think that's a good percentage to get into. Usually I try and disappoint about 20% of you. So look around, figure out which one of you. So let me dive into the modern testing principles. And what I'm going to do is talk about the principle. I'll give you the principle in full text, one at a time. And then I'll talk a little bit about what that means. And then for a couple of them, how I'm applying them in my day job, how I'm walking the talk. And the full list you can get from moderntesting.org. If you ever want to look at those, there'll be a link to it later. And again, the slides, you have a link to it. So that's what I'm going to do now. The first one is our priority is improving the business. It's not risk management. In fact, one other preface I should put on here is that we've had what's really crazy and humbling and maybe odd a little bit is that there have been meetups around the world to talk about these principles. Sometimes with people that know them really well and have a really good moderated experience, and sometimes not so much. We had a recent one, which is, and I'm okay with, to be clear, I'm okay with you saying you love these. I'm okay with you saying you hate these and they're stupid. It's totally fine. I need the feedback on, just like on a product, right? If all my customers told me they loved the product and it was awesome, I don't know what to improve. So I kind of want some telling me which parts suck, which parts are crummy. So the same thing with the principles. Some people have argued after looking at these within their context that, well, they're not a lot about testing. And so and they're not really modern. They're things we're doing, which is cool in both ways. Because remember the origin story that this term modern testing came out as a reaction to like what's different in our approaches today and traditional testing. So it's traditional versus modern, but these things are, they align well with a lot of practices in Agile. If any of you are familiar with the 3 ways of DevOps, which oddly I found after we did these, they're highly aligned. That's okay. This is about the team approach to quality. Okay, the first one is improving the business. What I want to call out here is a lot of times we view test as a cost. We being not me, but we in the larger community of testing is a cost. We spend money on testing. It's an investment we make, it's insurance, it's risk work. It's all fine. And I grew up in that world where we talk about the cost of testing. How much will it cost us to test this? What's the time we'll take to develop a feature versus test a feature? And today, it's about just building the feature, and testing is part of that. It isn't a separate thing we're spending more money in. And I believe that not only is test, and in modern testing, test is not just a cost center, but testing and quality built in to how we're making software is a revenue increaser. So not only are we not a cost, I'm saying that doing proper testing, integrating testing into everything you do and quality into everything you do in building a product will make your company more money. It's an accelerant for profit for those of you in software companies that make money or are public companies. And the move away from functional and code correctness to the customer quality in use. So that's what I mean by improving the business. I want to focus on that. 2, nothing controversial yet. We accelerate the team and use models like lean and theory of constraints to help identify priorities and mitigate bottlenecks. Meaning, and I talked about this earlier, when I worked on teams and I owned that whole thing from check-in to delivery, my focus is always helping the team move faster. What are the bottlenecks? If the bottleneck is testing, what do? Well, if the bottleneck is testing, it means that maybe one person's doing testing. And maybe the whole team needs to do it. There are other bottlenecks that happen. Maybe the bottleneck is if the bottleneck is deployment, we're going to go work on that. We're only going to work on improving testing if testing is the bottleneck. So you guys, you've heard of theory of constraints, right? From the original book, The Goal, and then the IT adaptation, the Phoenix Project. I think The Goal is a better read, but you have to kind of abstract the read to software. But IT Project, if you read the Phoenix Project, You will nod your head as well and go, yep, I've seen that. You probably all have someone on your team, or most of you have or had someone on your team who is the bottleneck. The bottleneck can be a person, it can be a process, it can be a team. We believe in modern testing that our role is to mitigate those bottlenecks. Not eliminate the bottleneck, mitigate it until it's not the largest problem anymore. I hate inefficiency, so this fits in well. Figuring out what's delaying. Even some of you may be following lean or agile. You don't have to follow the principles to a T, but knowing that part of what modern testing is accelerating the team. Some of the things I've thought about is in what things help accelerate is in the old world we had a handoff. Dev, here's my code, test it. Pair. Have any of you done pair testing with a developer? Oh my God, it's great. It's great. Almost every time we do it almost all my teams now, but I love hearing the comments when the person on my team comes back to me and says, we just pair tested a change, and generally, and to be clear, there are a lot of check-ins that I ask my team to not even be involved in. Depending on team by team, they figure out what that bar is where we don't need to involve the person from Alan's team. But when they do, they pair test, and almost always, either the developer or the tester will come to me and say, we found bugs that neither one of us would have found on our own. And that's success. So pair testing. Team goals, like we're going to ship this versus the old world of siloed ownership. Working on, these are all sound very agile-ish things, and that's because it's about delivering quality quickly to our customers. Serializing work over parallelizing work. Tooling, building good, again, for accelerating.
So,
I want to build.
Serializing? Are you going to go back to serializing? You skipped over.
I mentioned it briefly. I'm a big fan of Kanban as a method of Agile. So as to answer Keith's thing is, instead of working, and some people use what I call bad Kanban, where they have 80 million things in the working on list, with some people having 5 things they're working on. That's parallelizing. I like getting things done one at a time. In fact, one of my rules for Kanban is the way I manage worthwhile tangent. A lot of you that are doing Agile follow things like Scrum. You do your Scrum stand-up. You do the 3 questions. This is a rant of mine where people go, it's supposed to be, what'd you do yesterday? What are you doing today? What are you blocked on? People say, I'm still working on the Fizz Buster, and I'm not really blocked on anything. Next day comes up, we're still working on the Fizz Buster, I'm not really blocked on anything. The next day, and these are called the Scrum zombies, and it drives me nuts. So in Kanban, I ask one question for every item in any active column. What needs to be done to move this item to the right? And then that slight adjustment in question as well. I need to talk to blah, blah about this because I'm blocked, blah, blah, blah. The conversation is so much better. So tangent, but that's what I mean. I mean, you're working on one thing, you're focusing on it, getting it done, versus trying to do a bunch of stuff at once. Very much an agile principle, but it's help accelerate. That I see more features get done with higher quality with that process. And then building good infrastructure to help solve problems. This is in my not so distant past. We had a testing bottleneck, but rather than invest in fixing the infrastructure to solve the problem, I was given $500,000 in budget to go outsource more testers. I get why I can't say no, but I don't want to. I don't want to spend the money this way. So things like that. And again, I already told the story I was going to tell here about pair testing. So valuable. Treat your dev managers like test leads. It's super powerful. Principle number 3, we're a force for continuous improvement. Again, these overlapped and work with each other. Want to optimize the team for success? We are not a safety net. As I mentioned before, we don't want to take away the net completely, but we may want to lower the rope. We may want to give you a couple ropes on the side to walk with for the safety net metaphor. Safety net is a bottleneck. That ties into accelerating the team. We don't want to be there to catch you when you fall. We want to help you succeed. I'd rather be holding your hand from the ground while you walk across the rope. Okay, I'm done with the metaphor. I used to have a slide I showed in a lot of presentations about testers being the last line of defense before customers got the product. And then I compared that to the people shoveling horse shit after the end of the parade. We're not the last line of defense. We are accelerating quality towards our customers. Number 4, quality culture. This is what we do. We coach, lead, and nurture the team towards a more mature quality culture. I was in a panel discussion last week, and I mentioned that, I firmly believe this, that testers are not responsible for quality. We all, I like that. But in my world, I hold my team responsible and accountable for maturing the quality culture of the team. So the team owns quality, but the people that work for me, they own driving and improving that culture. And the feedback I got was, well, quality culture is very abstract. That's very difficult. And things are only abstract until you define them more. So it might be different for your context, but I defined quality culture. And generally, a couple big things that lead to this is you need people on my team, these are modern testers. I got to stop doing that with the microphone. They need leadership skills. So I coach my team a lot on leadership. They need to be able to influence people. I was having a conversation with one of the people on my team 10 minutes before this talk. And he asked, hey, I'm pushing back on this developer had a document where he was talking about the responsibilities for code review. And the guy on my team, Ryan, pinged me and said, hey, am I pushing too hard on this, or is this okay? And I read the doc, and he was pushing back on devs just doing some more. He asked questions, why can't developers run this? And the feedback was well, they could, but you're more suited to do that work. And it's no, and he pushed back more. I said, you're pushing back exactly the right amount. So that knowing how to, as a great quote from a book called Leadership on the Line by Heffitz, which I love, leadership is disappointing people at a level they can absorb. And that's my life. That's what I do. It's the people problem. Knowing how to improve a quality culture is about influencing people, not practices. But as I mentioned, we can define that. So some of the things I use are quality ownership. Does the test specialist on the team own quality entirely, or is it spread evenly? And I can tell you on my team, even on that team, it's probably again, I have QA people in more teams than I can count. And most of them spread across multiple teams. They do 10 to 30 or 40% of the testing. Actually, I should say 0 to 30 or 40% of the testing. So it's well owned across the team. Breadth of testing, this is, and I can tell you the number of times that someone has said, hey, we wrote unit tests and they have 90% code coverage. Our quality is wonderful. Yeah, well, in your narrow little world of what quality is, yes, but my job as a coach, I want to open up your world to all the things that can be quality. And that's what I mean by breadth. The agile testing quadrants are a good model of this. There are other models, but get your teams thinking beyond functional testing. Technical debt and maintenance. I come from a world of bug backlogs in thousands, tens of thousands if you count my brief foray into Windows. Those bugs are never going to get fixed. They keep them around as yes, I want to fix this someday. And I think many of you have worked on projects for a long time, have been in this view. I don't want to won't fix it because I think I may want to fix it someday, even though no customer has ever mentioned this bug in the last 3 years, but they might, so I'm going to keep it around. I'm happy to say that of all my teams, the team with the most bugs has 30 right now. But every team is on a goal to have 0 bugs and work from a 0 bug backlog by the end of the year. Half the teams are there already. A bug database, in some ways, this will get a reaction, is a bottleneck. Rather than use the bug database as a communication system, like here's my bug. Ooh, look, a bug assigned to me. I'll look at it. I need more information. I'll send it back. That bug ping pong game happens. Or if I just come to you and say, hey, here's this bug, and we pair and fix it together, much more efficient. So fixing bugs as you find them versus keeping them around forever, and other forms of debt as well. Code quality and tools, mostly in my context, this is like, what are we putting into our CI gates? Do we have the bare minimum there, maybe a few unit tests, or are we just continuously, or I shouldn't say continuously, frequently adding more analysis tools? I mentioned before the story of teams turning on code coverage gates. Those teams have also done linting gates. We're looking at adding, those teams are looking like, what else can we put in here? There's a whole world of things that can go into your CI to help you find more of those code correctness issues before things either go to production or get further testing. Development approach, is it big chunks versus small chunks? This is all about a lot about how well you're following Agile-ish principles. Data, and Brent and I have Brent Jensen, who's on the podcast with me, have a maturity model for data collection and usage. There is data oblivious. We've all been there. I hear stories about data. I don't know if we have any, whatever. Now I'm going to forget them all. Data aware, where you know it's there, but you're not sure what to do with it. And probably a lot of people I talk to are in that boat. Yeah, we collect data, but really just our PMs and BI people look at it. I don't know what to do with it for quality. Then you can become data driven, where you can make choices based on data. This is a big hump to get over. And then you can become data centric, where you can't even do work without data. Like all maturity models, which I don't like maturity models, you don't have to get to the highest level, but you have to know how to mature if you want to do more with data. I'm addicted to data. One thing that's happened, I didn't put that there. So I'll talk about data with the data principle. And then leadership. I got distracted. This is sort of the meta principle, meaning you have to have some leadership support for quality culture to happen. And this is a weird curvy model of leadership support. At the beginning level, you have no leadership support. They don't care. It's like cowboy culture. And then you grow where leadership drives quality via lots of scorecards and mandates, which is better than the one before, arguably. And then there's a stage where leadership has the rallying cry, but the team can focus around, but the quality culture is something that everybody has. And then there's a stage where leadership can go back to kind of stage one, where they're out of the way completely because they don't need to be there, because the team just gets it. So I think it's a weird growth. But that you need some leadership involvement, not through mandates, but through support. There's a difference. Number 5. This is the first one that gets some controversy. We believe that the customer is the only one capable to judge and evaluate the quality of our product. Some of us have lived in a world where, as QA or testers, we thought we are the voice of the customer. I have a persona and everything. So I am evaluating quality for the customer. And then we freak out or are surprised when maybe they're not happy with it. Like, I made this phone, pretend it's a phone, and it doesn't work right because you're holding it wrong is not a good answer. Some of you remember that. So you aren't the customer. You can be a proxy, but remember that you are not the customer. And again, data is going to come into this to figure out if you're building the right product. We should make sure that we're focusing on the business and the business value. Remember, customers don't want software. They want their problem solved. So make sure we're building something that helps solve their problem. And again, I've been doing this long enough. I worked on lots of teams where, with what I call the field of dreams software development, build it and they will come. I'm going to build this thing and you're going to like it. If you don't like it, there's something wrong with you. And you can shake things up. And in fact, a quick aside here, one way to tell, and you need data for this usually, but one way to tell whether you are, because the argument is, well, I'm innovating, but everybody hates it. They'll learn to like it. Is wrong. Generally what I've found is if you are truly innovating and advancing what you're building, you're going to have a group of people, you'll still have a group of people that hate what you're making, but also another group that loves it. And the best example I have of this is, probably most of you remember this. Remember when the Office came out with the ribbon toolbar? And a bunch of you hated it? And there's probably some of you that loved it, and the rest of you are just now used to it, and you don't remember a time before that. But it's a good example of a feature that was polarizing. Polarizing means that you are probably, if you're trying to innovate, do something different, you're doing the right thing. If everyone hates it, you did the wrong thing no matter how smart you think you are. Number 6, hinted at a lot, we use data extensively. And again, it ties back to accelerating. We want to close the gap between product hypothesis and business impact, meaning we want to take what we're building and figure out if it's the right thing as fast as possible. Some of you do A/B testing, experimentation. Heard of it a little bit? So in an experimentation culture, you can ship everything as a experiment. Meaning, you have a hypothesis on what this thing's going to do. It's going to improve click rate by 20%. Then you have that forces you to have the measurement in place beforehand to know if that experiment was successful or not. You can apply that experimentation culture to a bug fix. We believe that this change will decrease 403 errors by 95%. And then you can test against that. So I like this idea of hypothesis-based deployment. I just made up that term. But it helps us understand the real customer experience and helps us learn and adapt. Everything you ship can be a hypothesis. Some of the things I've done at Unity is just, again, we're starting from a team. The things that repair services like ads and analytics, they're pretty good. Some of the stuff is built into the editor, or it's a little less mature in its use of data. So these guys are my test leads. They're also my data engineering leads, I guess, because I talk to them about, I ask these questions. What does success look like? Let's use instrumentation to figure out if that's right. And then we'll look at it and adjust. Build, measure, learn, over and over and over again. Small changes. Lots of growth has happened. Lots of growth still needs to happen. Number 7, I'm going to duck behind the podium. We expand testing abilities, know-how across the team, more coaching. Understanding this may reduce or eliminate the need for a dedicated testing specialist. WTF. I told you I cover those quality still relevant posts. I'm not saying your jobs are going away. I'm not even saying all of your jobs are changing. What I'm saying is in a lot of the industry, it is changing. And talk a little bit, model here is, first of all, I've mentioned before, this is not a dark art. We can teach it. And also, if you just focus on, we're going to expand the testing abilities and know-how across the team. Focus on that. Pre-semicolon, focus on that. If you get to a stage where it makes sense for you not to have a dedicated tester, it will be natural. It isn't the Yahoo, we got rid of our testers, look at us, or what a lot of companies have done. If you're not going to have a person in a dedicated testing role, it will be a no-duh choice for you. So it's not, don't jump to the end here. I'm saying that's probably what's going to happen if you do it right. It's probably what's going to happen if you do it right. But it's OK. It'll feel good. Typical, even an agile test team, you have a bunch of software engineers and a tester. Should look kind of familiar. I say that, again, testing is not a dark art. A tester is a specializing generalist. We're really good at testing, but we can do some other things too. You all heard the quote about a jack of all trades? Jack of all trades, master of none. And there's another line that always gets left off so much that I've forgotten it, but it's like, jack of all trades, master of none, but it's better than being a master of one. Could be exactly right. Don't forget that part. So instead what we have is we have a bunch of software engineers, and we have other specialties. We have perf specialists, front-end specialists, testing specialists. We're just a specialist on a generalizing team. Teams like this build good software more efficiently, in my experience. Random cartoon. This is true when I left at Microsoft, but maybe less so. Maybe they're Nerf guns now. But that's just filler. So here's the traditional matrix, like QA organization is, there's me, there's a bunch of testers that work for me, but they're part of these feature teams. Pretty popular way of doing it. It's even how it's described in the Agile testing book. There's a solid line reporting here and sort of a dotted line reporting here. On my teams, 95% of the work these guys do comes from the feature lead. I'm there to help coach them, give them ideas, help them be leaders. What I've done is flopped the solid lines and the dashed lines. Is now these testers on most of my teams, not all the way there yet. I started off the team of about 45 people. I'm down to 12 as I slowly move my team to work for other people. I consistently tell my manager and his manager that I am working very hard to eliminate my role, but not my job. Be careful. And so far, I've gotten head nods, so I think I'm still in good shape. Probably within the next 3 or 4 months, 6 months at the most, I may have other people reporting to me. Who knows what I'll do if I'm going to manage people or not, but my team I had when I joined will all work for other managers. Nothing really changes. I just become, and again, early on I mentioned I'm the community leader. My community will all work elsewhere in the organization, which is fine. I can still influence them just as easy and make the right things happen. So a little bit of me walking the walk of this. I mentioned moderntesting.org, where you can find all of these principles listed out. You can add comments. Also, you can find moderntesting.org just forwards to our podcast site, so you can check out the podcast there. There's my only plug. Actually, my second to last only plug. And the modern testing mission, tying this all together as we accelerate the achievement of shippable quality. That's how I tie all those 7 principles together. That's what I think they support. Little bit of Twitter fandom. Even Lisa Crispin says, let's run with modern testing. There's talks. It's getting some traction. So whether you like it or not, someone likes it, and I feel pretty good about that. Lastly, a quote from William Gibson. This stuff is happening. It's just not happening everywhere. So it's good for you to be aware of it. Monty says thank you. I say thank you. Thank you. Whoa. All right. This apparently is a microphone. Somebody has questions. And I get to throw it and not hurt somebody.
And don't forget to review comments, please.
And listen to Keith. To you, not at you, right?
So the comment that you made about working yourself out of a job or out of a role.
Out of a role, not a job.
Role,
Let's be
yes,
careful.
Yes. But I would also point to that first off, there's a lot of organizations that would desperately probably love to have somebody able to work themselves out of a role. It means that you have enough cross-usable skills that you can actually either convert yourself into doing other things to help that process, or go someplace where you're desperately needed.
Yeah.
So,
I fully agree. And one of the things, and one of the other comments real quick from the panel I was in last week is, someone asked, what skills should a new tester learn? And I said, a lot of other skills too. Got a few head nods, but
Oh, yeah.
I believe that. All right, you get to throw it next.
Oh, cool.
This is going to hurt someone.
Oh, hope not. Hey, you had hand up first. Let's see if my depth perception will work.
Not bad.
So I'm in a little bit different of an organization. I do tooling for the OpenStack project, and we do a ton of gating. And in theory, we do a lot of this stuff. The developers are responsible for writing the tests when they push, and then we gate on those tests and all that. I think what we found trying to take it go faster, like take it to the next level, is the people that are kind of deeply involved in bootstrapping that burn out really, really quickly. And I was just curious, have you seen that? Is that something that you've run into? Like, how do you deal with that? Where an individual with enough skills across many different areas is kind of in the middle of everything, and because they're so, I don't want to say precious, but they're tied into all of the different moving parts, there's not enough hours in the day, they burn out, they leave, and
They sound like a bottleneck.
it could be.
I think always, actually, if you haven't read the Phoenix Project, you should read that, because I think the guy's name is Brent in that book, or Brent in that book, is very much like the person you're describing. And yeah, they get burned out. They feel like they can't take vacation because they're too involved, stuff going on. I think it's really important that you have multiple people. You can have someone who's best at things, but multiple people need to be able to do each thing. So it's, I have seen that, but I've seen it enough where I try and watch out for it before it happens. So I don't have, other than finding like a shadow to help get that work transferred over, somebody else can do it. I believe in this ABC model of, I should call it ACM model now, I call it of work you do. If you look at all the work, more free career advice, if you look at the work you do during a day, some chunk of it is going to stretch you and be hard for you. Some of it's going to be stuff you're just good at, and you're going to have some sort of mundane work. And then you want to have discussions of that with your team during retros or with your manager, because you want to minimize that mundane work, because your mundane work may be somebody else's above work, their stretch work. So that's one of the antidotes I use to make sure that work gets spread out appropriately. Anybody else? There's one over there.
I don't dare toss it.
Oh. He broke the unbreakable microphone.
Yeah, this is about the role that you told you have, software engineer / test specialist. Now, how do you find bugs with the same mentality that you have written the code? What I'm talking about is when both the roles are important, but a developer would write, he will presume certain conditions and he would build a system. And some of his conditions, when he tests, it is already hardwired in it, assuming it's a positive flow for him. But when testers, dedicated test specialists come on board, they look at the same piece with a new perspective, whether it's actually useful. They have a different voice, opinion. So if you have a software, this is well experienced from coming from kernel code testing background and not a web application or the modern cloud technologies. With the same mindset of a software engineer, if they do unit testing or they do testing role as well, the efficiency may not be as much. What you'll see is more of field and customer bugs coming up again.
What I've found in my last few years, and I did kernel development and driver testing as well in my career, but what I've actually found is in isolation, if I go to a developer all by himself and say, okay, write your code and then write a bunch of your tests and then check it in, you're absolutely right. There is some, without any help, they're going to have some bias there. But what I've found, going back all the way back to that project Astoria science project, is that working with them to write tests and pairing with them, they can learn to make that mind shift change. And also, in addition to being able to find bugs in their own code by just kind of learning how to put a different hat on, I've also found that even when they're by themselves, they know when they're stuck. They go, this is complicated. I think I've tested it. Here's they'll come to someone on my team, our testing specialist, and they'll get them involved. Real quick, one of the ways I drove this was when a developer has code he wants someone on my team to look at, the first question they'll ask is, at the beginning is, what have you already tested? And they'll say, okay, well, let's test this A, B, and C together. Then maybe the next time they'll come back and say, again, what have you tested so far? I said, I've done A and B. I said, what about C? Maybe even D. And we'll go a little bit deeper. Just in that context, whether it's coaching or pairing, they can change that mindset. They can get out of that and be able to find issues, even if they have some sort of code bias for looking at the happy path.
The way we worked around this issue was we did developer and a test expert code pairing and testing, and that worked out pretty well. They could understand what features were getting built in, what was the testing perspective around it, and what was the customer requirement around it. And it did bring in an aspect where developer did brief us out where he was a bit unclear of the flows and he wanted more test in a specific area versus an area which he was not certain about or was certain about. So pairing did help in that context, bringing in a tester dedicatedly. Thank you.
Cool. Keith? No one wants to make the long throw.
So maybe you just didn't show it in an organization, but I still think there's a place for test specialists, but it may not be at the functional team. And I'm wondering whether you have any of these, like security testers, penetration testers, performance testers, maybe chaos engineers, and kind of specialists like that. Because with security, yeah, you can find it in the data you've been attacked, but usually that's not when you want to find it.
Excellent point, Keith. I think as far as generalization, one of the areas where you actually, I think, need a specialist is security. And we have a security team that works on a lot of those things. We don't right now have a separate perf or chaos engineering team, but just because this is private, I'm thinking that as I get rid of my team, that may be the next team I form and run is teams around perf and security, perf and chaos engineering, things like that, like our infrastructure and tooling to help make sure those pieces are in place. So I think those pieces are important. Security especially, I think, still needs, we should know something about security, but the specialists are a great thing to have, and probably true for performance also, depending on what you're building. But yeah, I think there's definitely a place for that. One in the back. Keith isn't afraid.
Yeah, but I might be.
Oh, you got to do a little bit. Come on.
So before you talk, just my plug here is a blog site, podcast site, free ebook on automation. Probably not the typical automation book if you've read it. Yes?
I've never thought that testing was some dark art, but other than I hate to date myself, but the engineers that I worked with back in the 80s, they seemed to appreciate quality and tried very hard to get as much testing, their own testing done, but then people quit doing it. And then finally, we started having unit testing a lot more properly in agile teams. But in general, I don't find developers terribly interesting in knowing the basics of testing and the different kinds of stuff that they can do in their own code. So how do you get past that? I don't want to learn that stuff. I want to learn this stuff.
So the bit about quality culture is a big part of that. It's multifaceted, areas that need to grow and get more knowledge in. But to me, the big difference between, and I haven't been doing it quite as long as you, but almost, and we did have a lot of developers cared about quality, and it kind of went away. But the big difference now is stuff ships way faster, and customers are way more fickle. Like, if I download an app on my phone to do some task, if I don't like it in the first 5 minutes, I uninstall it and get a new one. And so it comes that getting that quality right and solving the customer problem right the first time, and then being able to adapt very quickly when it doesn't, maybe not even getting it perfect the first time, getting something out there that increases adoption and then iterating on that and adapting it to whatever comes up, that's revenue. And honestly, I think if you don't care, if you're a development team, I mean, quality is money. So anyway, I got off a little bit of tangent there, but I think the quality culture stuff I talked about applies a lot to that and can help drive that. I think it's important that we help get that interest and motivation back up. But yeah, it's one of the reasons why I like modern testing. It helps push that quality ownership of everyone back on the whole team. Okay, I know. Thank you.